Hypnosis is becoming more and more prominent in our culture. Everybody's talking about it, and everybody's asking the same question: is that stuff for real? When Don was named at the Joe Rogan podcast, a lot of people who were not previously aware of what you can achieve with hypnosis are now calling and asking, is that real? Is that for real? How can I get in on this? How can I change my life? My name is Flavio. I'm here to help you understand a little bit more about what you can achieve. What is it that I do? I help you change your mind about yourself so you can achieve better results. Typically that involves your love life, your health, and your wealth, your prosperity level. This is a very important point. Oftentimes a person will ask me how hypnosis can help them change their lives, and I explain that hypnosis is one tool, but it has to be backed up by a number of other disciplines. Otherwise, you're going to understand in a moment, hypnosis is just the access to the subconscious mind, and we can open the door and gain that access, but without a profound backbone of other disciplines, we wouldn't be able to achieve results. And this, by the way, explains why some people say, well, I went to see a hypnotist and nothing happened. There's a reason why that happens, and by the time we're done here today, you will know why that is. Let's take a deeper look at this. This is you and our lives as we know them, right? This is your life. Our lives as we know them are a direct reflection of everything that is stored in our subconscious. We all have a subconscious mind, and all of our lives are a reflection of that, because in the subconscious, we have this thing that we call the self-image. It's by the very definition, subconscious. We're not aware of it, but we do hold an image of ourselves in our minds, and we're unaware of it, subconscious. But what we experience in the world, our lives as we know them, is a reflection of that image. So all of us have areas of our lives that we really like. It's going well for you. No problem. You don't want to make any changes. And all of us have areas of our lives that we do want to make some changes. Let's just pick the example of a person who wants to lose weight. This is a very common example in the world of hypnosis. Let's use that as an example. Your situation might be different. This is just one example. So the person might read a book or go to the gym, and they might get into a diet, and they make a great deal of effort to adjust their weight by eating differently, by exercising more. And initially it does work. They do lose a few pounds. But as we all have seen and observed, eventually the weight comes back on, and usually more than what the person lost. And the reason why that happens is because we've been using willpower to change behavior as a way of changing our lives. But the self-image that is in the subconscious has never changed. So it bounces back. This is no different from having a thermostat in your house, and let's say you set the temperature. Let's say it's a very, very hot day outside. It's 100 degrees outside. And you have your temperature set to, let's say, 75 degrees inside of the house. And everything is fine, but the moment you open the door and the hot air comes into the house, then the air conditioner has to kick in, make an effort to restore what? To restore what's called the set point. In this case, the temperature, 75 degrees. The same thing happens at the level of the mind. We make an effort, we change our diet for a few days, for a few weeks, but there's a set point at the level of the unconscious that we call the self-image, and that set point will dictate that things should be restored, just as in the air conditioning example, and a person will gain weight again. So the solution to this would be to engage the subconscious mind, because the subconscious mind contains blocks to our desired outcomes. In other words, what it is that we want to achieve is being blocked by the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind also contains solutions to our problems. The subconscious isn't just a trash can with all of our problems from childhood or even a past life. The subconscious is also a fountain of wisdom and knowledge by which we can gain cooperation from and access to when we begin to become conscious of our unconscious, which of course is hypnosis. So here's a better explanation. So your subconscious mind contains blocks to your happiness and also solutions to your problems. Now, there's a horizontal blue line in this picture, and that is what we metaphorically refer to as the limen, which is the separation between conscious and unconscious. Everything that I know about myself, and I can tell you about it, is what we would call conscience, right? I'm conscious of what my name is, where I live, my car, whatever, things like this, right? This data, this information, I'm aware of it. And therefore, that's part of my conscience reality. I'm aware of it. But there are many, many things about each one of us, and it applies to hypnotists as well, of which we're not aware. It's about me, but I don't have conscious awareness of it. So, for instance, if you asked me what I did on the morning of July 18th, 1980, I really don't remember right now. But under deep hypnosis, I can actually retrieve those memories. Memories, ideas, solutions, blocks, issues that are about me that are retrievable through a special exercise that we call hypnosis are part of what we call the subconscious or unconscious, right? We use those words for the purposes of this conversation interchangeably. Subconscious, unconscious, same thing. So we define hypnosis as the bypass of this critical faculty. Basically, what that means is that we can connect conscious and unconscious, or to say it in a different way, we become consciously aware of the unconscious in the hypnotic state, which allows us to change our lives. The big deal about this is that there are many, many applications of this phenomenon. Hypnotherapists and coaches, such as myself, we use this phenomenon to help people improve the quality of their lives. And really, we can take any one of our problems or goals and fit into one of three categories: relationships, health, and wealth. And I'm sure there are many other things that we want out of life, but we can usually fit them into one of those three categories. People talk about vocation, for instance. That's a big deal. It's important that you do something in this world that you really love, but that kind of fits into wealth and relationships because, your relationship to the world, to other people, it also affects your health. So it kind of, we can squeeze any aspect of your life, even if a little bit tightly, but we can squeeze any aspect of our lives into one of those three categories. And this is an arbitrary, three categories, and you can have more categories there. This is just for the sake of conversation. Again, in your subconscious, you're going to find blocks to our objectives, to our goals, and also a solution to the problem. The red arrow in this picture represents hypnosis, meaning the bypass of the critical faculty, here represented by the horizontal blue line, which separates conscious from the unconscious. And by creating the connection between conscious and unconscious, by going into hypnosis, I can engage my subconscious, let's say, to solve a weight problem. I keep on gaining weight because there's something about my subconscious mind that basically mandates that to be the case. But by going into hypnosis, I can unlock that. I can see what the problem is, and I can retrieve a creative solution to the problem. In the area of relationships, these are some of the most common reasons why people would go to a hypnotherapist. Of course, the chronically single, that's the person who can never meet anybody. They say, look, I keep on meeting the wrong person, or I never meet anybody. Oftentimes, they come to see me to forget an ex. It's a very difficult thing to do, depending on how the relationship ended. It can be traumatic in some cases. And it's difficult to let go, to forget, to move on with your life. Couples who are fighting too much, or the opposite, they're not talking at all, they're growing apart. The silent treatment, how can I restore that relationship? Heartbreak, sometimes it isn't so much about trying to forget an ex. Sometimes it's pure heartbreak. They've let go of the person, but for some reason, they still feel brokenhearted. It sounds like it's the same thing, but it isn't. True heartbreak is really not about the other person. It's an interesting concept, and we can get more into this later. But also, relationship among siblings, and we see this often when, say, a parent dies, if there is an inheritance on the table, oftentimes there's conflict there as well. Parent and teens, very, very difficult relationships. I have a program called Tremendous Teens, and I work a lot with parents and teens in that situation. Very, very difficult. And of course, business partners start a business, they do really well, then there's a change. This is very, very common. A third party will come in. So, for instance, two men have a business together. This is very common. I'm working with a couple of men right now, and they were both married to their respective wives, but only the two men were partners. One of the partners, one of the men, got divorced and now has a girlfriend. As that girlfriend came into the picture, the relationship between the two men, the two business partners, became strained. And you might ask, well, what does one thing have to do with the other? Well, this is why you need your hypnotherapist. There's a lot that goes on when a person is divorced and has a new partner, and that does affect all of our various relationships. Another area that we do a lot of work in is in the area of health. And here, typically, we see either sleep problems, quite common, can't sleep, or I cannot sleep at night, or I'm too sleepy throughout the day. Sleep cycle, sleep disorders are very, very common nowadays. Big deal, big problem. And, people use medication, whatever, that sometimes works for a while, but not long term. And of course, the other big deal, at least to a hypnotherapist, is issues regarding weight. And oftentimes people are surprised when I say that some people come to see me to gain weight. Not only athletes and bodybuilders want to gain mass and gain weight, and they come to a hypnotist to condition their minds to work out harder and so forth, but also people who have known medical illnesses. Oftentimes in cancer, people have trouble eating, holding food down, and, they begin to lose too much weight, and that becomes a problem to their health. So we've helped people gain weight when it's medically indicated to do so. Also in rare cases, I tell people it's about 10% of the people who come to see me for a weight problem want to gain weight. But sometimes they're referred by a psychologist and they suffered from or are being treated for anorexia, for instance, but they still need to bulk up a little bit. So I've worked in those situations as well, and they've gained weight. The other area is what we call MUS, medically unexplained symptoms. That's the person who says, I feel like I'm sick, I feel like I'm not well, and they go to their physician and they run some blood tests, and the physician says, look, everything is okay with you, I cannot find what's wrong with you. But the person says, yeah, but I don't feel right? So it's a medically unexplained. They're having symptoms, but we can't quite explain. And this happens more often than perhaps you may be aware of. If you're not one of those people experiencing MUS, you might not know that this is quite common, actually. In the area of wealth, you typically have the person who either cannot make enough money for whatever reason, or they have some type of upper limit installed in their subconscious minds. And if they were programmed to make X number of dollars a year, no matter how much effort they make, they never quite break through that upper limit. And if they do, if they win a lottery, if they break through that upper limit, they lose it all. And I've worked with countless people in this category. It's a very, very interesting situation. Again, just like the body weight example, there seems to be like a set point there for prosperity. And even if a person makes an effort to change their prosperity level, without changing their self-image, they end up readjusting quite quickly. They lose the money, and the same thing happens in reverse. They have demonstrated this over and over. You take a person who is a multimillionaire, you strip them of all of their contacts and access to bank accounts, and you drop them in the middle of a city or a different country even. They've done this with many, many people over the years. And these people, usually within 90 days, are wealthy again. And they started literally from zero as an experiment. And what does that prove? That proves exactly what hypnotists have been saying forever. The idea of wealth in those cases is installed in the person's subconscious minds. So even if you strip them of everything they own as an experiment, let's say, they immediately make their fortune again because it is an expression of who they are. This has been, we see movies about, I think Discovery Channel did a big deal on Grant Cardone, I believe, and I have seen this over the years. Many, many people. Abraham Lincoln, the president, went bankrupt, I think 2 or 3 times and built a fortune again. And you see this over and over again, historically and currently. And it is the exact, nobody comes to a hypnotherapist to say, oh, look, I'm wealthy and I keep on making more money. But what that phenomenon demonstrates is its flip side. The guy who says, no matter what I do, I cannot make money. It's for the same reason. In other words, there's something in that person's unconscious that prevents them from making money in the same exact way, except in reverse, that the person who has a wealth mentality, even if you take away everything they own, within 90 days, they're wealthy again. Same exact mechanism, but 2 different polarities there. Having said all of this, sometimes a person will say to me, man, this sounds great, but I just don't believe in hypnosis. And I tell them, look, let's save the idea of belief for your religion and your faith, which I greatly respect, but this has nothing to do with belief. Because look, the existence of something is not dependent upon your belief in it. I can tell you that I don't believe in the law of gravity. I don't believe in gravity. So I'm going to jump off the building. Whether I believe in it or not, gravity is going to attract me at a very high rate toward the center of the earth. And at some point, I'm going to collide with the surface of the earth. And it's not going to be pretty. My belief in gravity does not change that. The same thing is going to happen no matter what we drop. A person might say to you, I believe the earth is flat. I believe there is a God. I believe this or I believe that, or I don't believe this, I don't believe that. Our beliefs don't change the object of our beliefs. In other words, whether God exists or not, my belief in it does not change its possible existence. And I'm not suggesting that it does or it doesn't. I'm saying if it does exist regardless of my belief. Again, the same thing, the shape of the earth. The earth might be round, it might be flat. I believe it's round, but other people don't believe it's round. They believe the earth is flat. Does that change the shape of the planet? The shape of the planet is what it is, regardless of what you believe. Hypnosis has been scientifically and clinically validated for many, many years. And if you're free to believe whatever you want to believe, but it does not change the fact. When we talk about the reality of the phenomenon of hypnosis, you have anecdotal data, right? I mean, that's the guy that says, I went to a hypnotist, it worked for me. I went to a hypnotist and it didn't work for me. That is just people telling stories, and the reviews there are positive and negative. Some people swear by it, some people say it's not so good. And that's okay. It's just like a restaurant. Some people like it, some people don't like it. That's all right. That's anecdotes, that's people's stories, people's opinions, not a problem. There's another vein, there's another line of evidence that we call clinical data. Those are studies. That's when you take a group of people that want to achieve a particular objective, let's say lose weight. You take 100 people, you hypnotize them, and statistically speaking, they lose more weight than another group that was doing the same type of diet but didn't lose as much weight. That's just an example. The famous example here is a study that was done many years ago, I believe was in the 1970s, and maybe one of you can correct me, where 2 groups of people who had never played basketball were each trained differently. One group was given a coach, a basketball coach, and they were shown how to throw free throws, to throw the ball into the basket. And another group was, taught how to visualize, how to go into a hypnotic state and see the ball going into the basket. And at the end of 1 week, with these two different groups being trained differently, one being trained at the court with the basketball coach and the other with a mentalist or a hypnotist, I believe the mentalist group was as good or a little better than the other group. And again, experiments of this type show that the phenomenon of hypnosis is real. People have done studies on all kinds of things, pain control, all kinds of things, birth, the birth of babies, what they sometimes nowadays call hypnobirthing. There are all kinds of studies showing that if you use hypnosis, you get better outcomes. So that's clinical data. Now, the thing with clinical data is that there has always been this criticism, this valid criticism. Well, maybe these people did better because they really liked the hypnotist. Maybe they did better because in addition to hypnosis, they were getting something else. Maybe, and there's always this maybe. Maybe there's something else. In science, we call that a confounding factor. There are other factors that we cannot isolate that may explain why these people are doing better. But in the last 100 years or so, a little bit less than 100 years, we have all this organic data showing that the hypnotic state is real. What do I mean by organic data? Well, brain studies that show that the brain of the hypnotized person is working differently from the brain of the same person not hypnotized. There's a difference there. The brain state is different. So hypnosis is a real neurological phenomenon, not just a mental phenomenon. And this is really, really important. The studies began back in the late 1930s with EEG data, electroencephalogram. They started putting little wires on the person's scalp and noticing that the electrical activity that they could at the time pick up from the scalp. I mean, this whole science has improved, has advanced a ton since then, but they were able to pick up some very faint signals, and they were able to see that the hypnotized person, the electrical activity in their brain changed a little. Today we call them alpha waves, theta waves, but they could see that there was a difference there. So we knew, even going back to the 1930s, that brain function changes when the person is hypnotized. It's not just a mental phenomena where I like my hypnotist, therefore I'll eat less and lose weight. No. There's an actual neurological mechanism there to the idea of hypnosis. This is important for those who are wondering whether hypnosis is real or not. Here you have a paper in the journal Science. Now, Science, I think Science and Nature would be considered by most scientists to be two of the most prestigious journals in the scientific world, right? I mean, to get your paper published in Science, it does take quite a bit, right? It takes quite a bit because they have many people, everybody wants to be published in Science, and as a result, they have a very strict filter to see what gets published in that journal. But here you have a paper from 1997 showing, and in this paper, they used PET scans, positron emission tomography. That's the test. You may have had one of these, and if you're not familiar with it, essentially, they inject a sugary substance into your veins, but the molecules of sugar, of glucose, are radio-labeled. In other words, they attach some radioactive element to the sugar. And the reason why they do that is because whenever there's metabolism, sugar is consumed. And so the blood flows a little bit more to the areas of the brain that are more active. And then by using essentially like a Geiger counter or like a gamma camera, they can pick up the regions of the brain that are most metabolically active, right? Because there's more radiation there. Now, people always ask me, well, is that radiation dangerous? And I was like, no. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny little dosages. And PET scans have been used for a while now, and they're quite useful in medicine. what they were able to show in this paper, 1997, is that when they inflict pain on subjects, and here in this particular study, they immersed the subject's hand in hot water. 47 degrees is not enough to create damage to the tissue, but it's painful. And all they wanted to see is how the brain responds to the pain. So there are two different areas of the brain, the somatosensory cortex, right? The part of the brain that actually perceives the pain. And another part, the anterior cingulate cortex, the part of the brain that actually, the part of the brain that perceives the pain. One part is more organic. It's like, okay, the body realizes that there's a problem here. The other has to do with my perception of the pain. So I'll give you an idea. Under deep anesthesia, chemical anesthesia, the brain registers the insult, but the person doesn't feel it, right? So this is an example here. What they're able to show is that by hypnotizing people, the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex, responded differently to the pain. And this is a big deal because it shows that the brain is responding differently to the hypnotized person. Same stimulus as opposed to the non-hypnotized person. Big deal. And there are many papers that prove the same type of thing in different ways. In other words, hypnosis is a physiological phenomenon. Now, some people tell me, well, that's a one-off paper. And it's really not true. Here you have a paper, I believe 2024, published in the International Journal of General Medicine. And this is a bibliometric study where they measure how much information is actually published on a particular topic. And regarding the topic of hypnotherapy, there were 1,549 papers that passed a certain selection criteria. This is not all of the publications, but only the ones that passed a certain selection criteria between 1994 and 2023. That's 1.1 paper a week in a scientific publication, specifically on the topic of hypnotherapy. In other words, they filtered out all of these publications, and it wasn't enough for the word hypnotherapy to be mentioned in a paper. The paper had to be about hypnotherapy or about hypnosis in a scientific journal. And still, over one paper a week for 29 years. So every single week, on the average, more than one paper is coming out. And not only that, they showed in this paper that there's an annual increase of 8.5%, meaning that every year, more and more papers are being published on the subject of hypnosis, which shows that there's a tremendous amount of interest in the study of hypnosis as a physiological phenomenon so that people can change their lives. We all want to change our lives. The good news is that hypnosis is real. And the bad news is that hypnosis is real. And whenever I say this, people look at me quizzically. And the reason why I say the bad news is hypnosis is real is because the assumption is that only your friendly neighborhood hypnotist hypnotizes you. And that's not true. Hypnosis is a brain phenomenon, and there are many ways to go into hypnosis. And television, movies, advertisement, all of that stuff hypnotizes us as well. So the quality of our lives today, whether you like it or not, the quality of your life, whether you like it, your life or not, it is the result of hypnosis. The primary period of our lives when we were all hypnotized, by definition, there was no critical faculty, is childhood. We're all hypnotized, meaning there's no critical faculty. Whatever we were told as children stuck to who we are. And sometimes we have to deal with that for the rest of our lives. So it is real. But the good news is that what hypnotherapists are trained to do is to, in a sense, dehypnotize us. In other words, we can see what's not working, or we can see what your objectives are, and we can make it work for you by going back into hypnosis, addressing the subconscious need,